I read a review article uh, that you're a co-author on, which looked at the understanding that we've gleaned from the Spanish influenza of 1918. And you said recently, I think, in the Australian that SARS-CoV-2 is, we should say the Spanish influenza killed approximately 50 million people, and it was one of the most, I suppose, fatal events that the human race has seen in human history. But you said that SARS-CoV-2 was equally infectious and fatal. As a counterpoint to that, I note a recent interview with Professor Michael Levitt, who's also a Nobel laureate at Stanford University, who has said that the lockdowns in countries like Australia were a mistake, and that in fact he didn't feel that the disease was as deadly, well, certainly deadly to older people, a certain older demographic, but that the economic detriment would be greater than the disease itself. And I just wondered what your thoughts were about that.
Yes. Firstly, the statement that that COVID-19 is as bad as the Spanish flu. I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding between me and the journalist there. I might have said it's spreading like Spanish flu, but I've never thought it's as bad as Spanish flu. And the reason for that is Spanish flu killed a lot of fit young adults. This one doesn't. It kills some, but not many. So I don't think it's as bad as the Spanish flu. We won't know what the eventual death totals are or what the long-term health consequences are for those who get infected and recovered for some considerable time. We really, it's just got to work its way through. I'd always been a bit embarrassed by the fact that we said, 40 to 100 million people died of the Spanish flu, and the fact we haven't had a better figure, but I'm wondering whether we'll get a better figure out of COVID-19. I mean, some jurisdictions are actually trying to suppress the numbers, including some American states, which is very
it seems as though you support the idea of the lockdowns as a really good pragmatic way of limiting spread and social distancing, and that was at odds with someone like Professor Michael Levitt. It should be noted, though, that Michael Levitt is not an epidemiologist.
Well, I'm not an epidemiologist either, but I have been a bit involved in this area for years. But Michael Levitt said that early on. I'm not sure he's still saying it. They've had 70,000 deaths in the United States, and I think they'll be lucky to finish with less than 250,000 to 500,000. So he might have changed his mind somewhere along the line. But it was always a legitimate argument to say, okay, this is mainly killing old people and people who aren't very fit. And so if you're a real strict Darwinian, you might say, well, let them go. And that's an argument. The British tried to protect the old people at the beginning and tried to lock them away. That worked very badly. And they've had a lot of infection. Proportionally, they've had more deaths than the United States, but it really got going a bit faster there than in the US at a big level. So it's always been a legitimate argument. And personally, as an older person, I'm grateful to the Australian government and to the Australian people for going along with the lockdown, because what that did is it allowed us to put in place a lot more testing capacity so we can track down if we get spot fires after we relax the guidelines, as we are doing. And it will also allowed us to get much more hospital equipment and beds and trained personnel in place. So if someone gets this disease now, we hopefully won't get into the position that Northern Italy got into, that people over 65 were simply triaged as far as ventilators was concerned and essentially left to die without help.
I believe historically as well that countries that when pandemics have broken out, I think 1957, 1968, obviously 2009, that the countries that locked down early actually recovered more quickly economically as well. So,
but compared with this, these were minor events. I mean, this is a major event, which in economic terms is certainly in many ways comparable to 1918. And it was true in 1918, actually, that the American jurisdictions, which locked down more effectively, did a lot better. Philadelphia, for instance, where I lived for a number of years, didn't and had very high death rates. And so locking down does work. I mean, we've seen that it works, but we can't stay locked down forever for obvious reasons. And I think what's being done now is basically what's rational. And we'll see how it goes. I mean, we don't know how it will go. We're all hoping we can keep this as kind of spot fires that we just damp down. If that works, I think we'll be in good shape. It may be we're better off than we think we are, and we won't see a lot of flare-ups. But my suspicion is once people start crowding together again, particularly in pubs and bars and nightclubs and places where you kind of drop your guard, we'll see flare-ups. But we want to keep them under control, and I think the Treasurer has just been saying that, I think, this afternoon.
Well, it runs counter. Professor Levitt's original idea was just, he doesn't use the term, but somewhere around herd immunity. But if you look at the critical factor rates, even the most conservative ones, I mean, they've changed over time, but I think 1.4%. You know, if you're looking at 60% of people infected, 20 to 60% of people infected, you get something that sounds like herd immunity. Then you're looking at 50 to 150,000 deaths in somewhere like Australia.
That's correct. Yeah, that would be the case if it just ran rampant. The death rates will be up to the time we get a decent vaccine. I have no real doubt that we can get a decent vaccine, but I think Australia wouldn't see that before the first quarter of 2021 under even the most optimistic predictions. Some other countries might. But we'll just have to see what happens. We don't know, quite frankly. But there's a British vaccine that's already gone into about, I think, 500 or 600 people in the UK.
Right.
And basically half of them have got the vaccine, half haven't. They've been put out there in the community where the virus is still transmitting, and we'll see whether they're protected or not and whether they're safe if they are protected. So it's basically, that's how it has to be tested. And once you've tested a vaccine through animals, which is basically some form of animal like a ferret or a hamster or some genetically manipulated mouse strain, you then have to test it in monkeys, macaques or African greens in this case. And if that looks safe at that stage and it looks to be effective, then you have to put it into people, and you just have to put them out there where the virus is, because you can't challenge them with virus. So it's there's a risk in it, and there's a risk in it for the people who take the vaccine. There's also the possibility they'll be protected early, which would be nice for them.